Welcome back to Biography Central. Imagine the moment you discover that the one you love has renounced everything you know, even you. What if this renunciation was not just of the world, but of a deeper, inner call, one that no earthly bond could change? In today's episode, we explore this poignant chapter in the life of Ramana Maharshi, where the paths of love, duty, and self-realization dramatically intersect. We witness the emotional and spiritual turmoil faced by Ramana Maharshi's family, especially his mother, as they search for him. Ramana, now fully immersed in the spiritual path, shows profound detachment from worldly ties, even as his loved ones, particularly his mother, hope for his return. This chapter captures the intensity of human emotions colliding with the higher call of the soul, showcasing how the young sage's journey towards self-knowledge was marked by both personal sacrifice and divine clarity. Stay tuned as we delve into this heart-wrenching chapter, where destiny and devotion collide. Chapter 5. The Question of Return. When the young Venkataraman left home, it came as a complete surprise to his family. Despite his changed manner, and despite the family destiny, no one had anticipated it. Searches and inquiries were made without avail. His mother, who was staying at the time with relatives at Madurai, was more distressed than any of them. She implored her brothers-in-law, Subiyar and Nilayapar, to go out and search until they found him. A rumor was heard that he had joined a theatrical troupe playing traditional religious dramas in Trivandrum. Nilayapar promptly went there and made inquiries among the various dramatic companies, but of course without result. Still, Aligamal refused to accept the failure and insisted on his going a second time and taking her with him. At Trivandrum, she did in fact see a youth of Venkataraman's age and height, and with similar hair, who turned his back on her and went away. Feeling convinced that it was her Venkataraman and that he was avoiding her, she returned home dejected. Subiyar, the uncle with whom Venkataraman had stayed in Madurai, died in August 1898. Nilayapar and his family went to attend the funeral, and it was there that they had their first news of the missing Venkataraman. A young man who was attending the ceremony told them that during a recent visit to a mutt private temple in Madurai, he heard one Annamalai Tumbarun speaking with great reverence of a young Swami at Thiruvannamalai. Hearing that the Swami came from Tiruchuli, he had asked for more details and learnt that his name was Venkataraman. "It must be your Venkataraman, and he is now a revered Swami," he concluded. Nilayapar was a second-grade pleader practicing at Madurai. On hearing this news, he at once set out for Thiruvannamalai with a friend to verify it. They found their way to the Swami, but he was already staying in the mango orchard, and its owner, Venkataraman Naikar, refused them in trance. He, as Mountie, has taken a vow of silence. Why go in and disturb him? Even when they pleaded that they were relatives, the most he would allow was to send in a note to him. Nilayapar wrote on a piece of paper that he had with him, "Nilayapar, pleader of Madurai, wishes to see you." The Swami showed already that keen perception of mundane affairs coupled with complete detachment from them, which was to characterize him later and which surprised so many devotees. He observed that the paper on which the note was written came from the registration department and had some office matter on the back of it in the handwriting of his elder brother, Nagaswami, from which he deduced that Nagaswami had become a clerk in the registration department. Just the same in later years, he would turn a letter over and examine its address and postmark before opening it. He gave permission for the visitors to enter, but when they did so, sat aloof and silent without a trace of the interest he had just shown in examining the note. Any sign of interest would only have encouraged the vain hope of his return. Nilayapar was deeply moved to see him in this state, a Swami but unkempt, unwashed with matted hair and long nails. Supposing him to be Mountie, he addressed himself instead to Palaniswami and Naikar, explaining that it gave him great pleasure to find that one of his family had attained such a high state, but that the creature comforts should not be ignored. The Swami's relatives wished to have him near them. They would put no pressure on him to abandon his vows or mode of life. Let him continue a Mountie silent and an ascetic, but at Madurai, near where Nilayapar lived, there was the shrine of a great saint. He could stay there, and his wants would be attended to without disturbing him. The pleader pleaded with all his eloquence, but in this case without avail. The Swami sat motionless with no sign even of having heard. Nelyapar had no option but to accept his failure. He wrote to Aligamal the good news that her son had been found, coupled with the distressing news that he was quite changed and would not go back to them. After 5 days at Thiruvannamalai, he returned to Manmadurai. Shortly after this, the Swami left the mango orchard and went to a small temple of Arunagiri to the west of Iunkulam Tank. Always reluctant to depend on others for service, he decided now to go out daily and beg his food instead of letting Palaniswami provide for him. "You go one way to beg your food, and I will go another," he bade him. "Let us not live together." To Palaniswami, it was a terrible blow. Devotion to the Swami was his mode of worship. He went out alone as bidden, but nightfall found him back at Arunagirinathar temple. How could he live without his Swami? He was allowed to stay. The Swami was still maintaining silence. He would stop at the threshold of a house and clap his hands, and if any food was given him, would receive it in his cupped hands and eat it standing in the road. Even though invited, he would never enter a house. He went on a different street each day and never begged twice from the same house. He said later that he had begged in nearly all the streets of Thiruvannamalai. After a month at the Arunagirinathar temple, he took up his abode in one of the towers of the great temple and the Alari garden in the temple. He was already followed by devotees wherever he went. He stayed here only a week and then went to Pavalakunru, one of the eastern spurs of Arunachala, and stayed in the temple there. He would sit here as before, immersed in samadhi, the bliss of being, and only leave the place to beg food while Palaniswami was away. It often happened that the temple priest would lock him in and go away after performing puja, not troubling to look and see whether he was inside. It was here that Aligamal found her son. After receiving the news from Nelyapar, she waited until the Christmas holidays when her eldest son, Nagaswami, was free to accompany her, and then went to Thiruvannamalai. She recognized her Venkataraman immediately, despite his wasted body and matted hair. With all a mother's love, she lamented his condition and besought him to go back with her. But he sat unmoved, not answering, not even showing that he heard. Day after day she returned, bringing him tasty things to eat, entreating and reproaching, but without effect. One day, stung by his apparent lack of feeling for her, she burst into tears. He still did not answer, but, lest his compassion should show and give her false hopes of what could not happen, he rose and walked away. Another day, she enlisted the sympathy of the devotees who had gathered around, pouring out her grief to them and beseeching them to intervene. One of them, Pachayappa Pillai, said to the Swami, "Your mother is weeping and praying. Why do you not at least give her an answer? Whether it is yes or no, you can reply to her." Swami need not break his vow of silence. Here are pencil and paper. Swami can at least write what he has to say. He took the pencil and paper and in utterly impersonal language wrote, "The ordainer controls the fate of souls in accordance with their prarabdha karma, destiny to be worked out in this life, resulting from the balance sheet of actions in past lives. Whatever is destined not to happen will not happen. Try as you may. Whatever is destined to happen will happen. Do what you may to prevent it. This is certain. The best course, therefore, is to remain silent." In essence, this is the same as Christ saying to his mother, "Woman, what have I to do with you? Don't you know that I have to be about my Father's business?" In form, it is very typical of Sri Bhagwan. First, that he should stay silent when the answer could only be negative, and then that when the silence was not accepted and under further pressure, he did give an answer. It was couched in such general terms as to be an impersonal doctrinal utterance, and yet at the same time an answer to the specific question according to the needs of the questioner. Sri Bhagwan was uncompromising in his teaching that whatever is to happen will happen, while at the same time he taught that whatever happens is due to prarabdha, a man's balance sheet of destiny acting according to so rigorous a law of cause and effect that even the word justice seems too sentimental to express it. He refused ever to be entangled in a discussion on free will and predestination, for such theories, although contradictory on the mental plane, may both reflect aspects of truth. He would say, find out who it is who is predestined or has free will. He said explicitly, all the actions that the body is to perform are already decided upon at the time it comes into existence. The only freedom you have is whether or not to identify yourself with the body. If one acts a part in a play, The whole part is written out beforehand, and one acts as faithfully whether one is Caesar who is stabbed or Brutus who stabs, being unaffected by it because one knows one is not that person. In the same way, he who realizes his identity with the deathless self acts his part on the human stage without fear or anxiety, hope or regret, not being touched by the part played. If one were to ask what reality one has when all one's actions are determined, it would lead only to the question, who then am I? If the ego that thinks it makes decisions is not real, and yet I know that I exist, what is the reality of me? This is only a preparatory, mental version of the quest that Sri Bhagavan prescribed, but it is an excellent preparation for the real quest. And yet, the apparently conflicting view that a man makes his own destiny is no less true, since everything happens by the law of cause and effect, and every thought, word and action brings about its repercussion. Sri Bhagavan was as definite about this as other masters. He said to a devotee, Sivaprakasam Pillai, in a reply quoted in Chapter 10, as beings reap the fruit of their actions in accordance with God's laws, the responsibility is theirs, not his. He constantly stressed the need for effort. It is recorded in Maharshi's Gospel that a devotee complained, after leaving this ashram in October, I was aware of the peace that prevails in Sri Bhagavan's presence enfolding me for about 10 days. All the time, while busy in my work, there was an undercurrent of that peace and unity. It was almost like the dual consciousness which one experiences while half asleep at a dull lecture. Then it faded out entirely, and the old stupidities came in instead. And Sri Bhagavan replied, if you strengthen the mind, that peace will become constant. Its duration is proportionate to the strength of mind acquired by repeated practice. In spiritual instruction, a devotee referred explicitly to the apparent contradiction between destiny and effort. If, as is said, everything happens according to destiny, even the obstacles that retard and prevent one from successfully carrying out the meditation may have to be considered insuperable as being set up by such irrevocable destiny. How then can one ever hope to surmount them? And to this Sri Bhagavan replied, that which is called destiny, preventing meditation, exists only to the externalized and not to the introverted mind. Therefore, he who seeks inwardly in quest of the self, remaining as he is, does not get frightened by any impediment that may seem to stand in the way of carrying on his practice of meditation. The very thought of such obstacles is the greatest impediment. The concluding statement in the message he wrote out, the best course, therefore, is to remain silent, applied specifically to his mother, since she was asking what could not be granted. It applies to people in general in the sense that it is no use kicking against the pricks, opposing destiny that cannot be averted, but it does not mean that no effort should ever be made. The man who says, everything is predestined, therefore I will make no effort, is intruding the false assumption, and I know what is predestined. It may be that he is cast in a part in which effort has to be made. As Sri Krishna told Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, his own nature will compel him to make effort. The mother returned home, and the Swami remained as before, and yet not quite. During the 2.25 years that he spent in temples and shrines at Thiruvannamalai, the first signs of a return to an outwardly normal life were already appearing. He had already begun to take food daily at a regular hour and then, so as not to be dependent on anyone, to go out in search of it. He had spoken a few times. He had begun to respond to devotees, to read books, and to expound the essence of their teaching. When he first came to Thiruvannamalai, he sat immersed in the bliss of being, utterly ignoring the world and the body. He would take food only if it was brought to his hands or mouth, and even then barely enough to sustain the body. This has been described as tapas, but the word tapas covers a very composite meaning. It implies concentration leading to austerity, normally in penance for past indulgence, and to root out all desire for its repetition and restrain the outgoing energy which seeks a vehicle in the mind and senses. That is to say, that tapas normally means striving for realization by means of penance and austerity. In the case of Sri Bhagavan, the elements of strife, penance, and forcible restraint were completely lacking, since the false identification of the I with the body and the resultant attachment to the body had already been broken. There was even no austerity from his point of view. since he had utterly ceased to identify himself with the body that underwent austerity. He intimated this in later years by saying, "I did not eat, so they said I was fasting. I did not speak, so they said I was mounty." To put it quite simply, the seeming austerity was not in quest of realization, but as a result of realization. He has explicitly said that there was no more sadhana, quest, or striving after the spiritual awakening at his uncle's house at Madurai. So also, Sri Bhagwan was not a mountie in the usual sense of observing a vow of silence in order to shut himself off from contact with others. Having no worldly needs, he simply had no need to speak. Moreover, he has explained that, on seeing a mountie, it occurred to him that not speaking would be a good defense against disturbance. In the early months, immersion in bliss often shut off perception of the manifested world. He has referred to this in his picturesque style. "Sometimes I opened my eyes and it was morning, sometimes it was evening. I did not know when the sun rose or when it set." To some extent this continued, only it became rare instead of usual. In later years, Sri Bhagwan once said that he often heard the beginning of the Parayanam, chanting of the Vedas, and then the end, but had been so absorbed that he had heard nothing in between and wondered how they had got to the end so soon and whether they had left anything out. However, even during the early months at Thiruvannamalai, there was often full observance of events, and in later years he would relate things that had happened at this period, of which people at the time thought he was unaware. Complete absorption in the self with resultant oblivion to the manifested world is termed nirvikalpa samadhi. This is a state of blissful trance but is not permanent. Sri Bhagwan has compared it, in Maharshi's Gospel, to a bucket of water lowered into a well. In the bucket is water, the mind, which is merged with that in the well, the self, but the rope and bucket, the ego, still exists to draw it out again. The highest state, complete and final, is Sahaja Samadhi, referred to briefly at the beginning of Chapter 2. This is pure, uninterrupted consciousness, transcending the mental and physical plane, and yet with full awareness of the manifested world, and full use of the mental and physical faculties, a state of perfect equilibrium, perfect harmony, beyond even bliss. This he has compared with the waters of a river merged in those of the ocean. In this state, the ego, with all its limitations, is dissolved once and forever in the self. This is absolute freedom, pure consciousness, pure I amness, no longer limited to the body or the individuality. Sri Bhagwan was already in this supreme state, although the outer awareness was not yet continuous. The return to outer activity that came later was only apparent and involved no real change. As he explained in Maharshi's Gospel, in the case of the jnani, enlightened, the rise or existence of the ego is only apparent, and he enjoys his unbroken transcendental experience in spite of such apparent rise or existence of the ego, keeping his attention always on the source. This ego is harmless. It is like the skeleton of a burnt rope. Though it has a form, it is no use to tie anything with. Have you ever wondered what makes a place sacred? In the next episode, we explore one such extraordinary place, Arunachala, the hill that Ramana Maharshi called the heart of the earth. It's a place where legends come alive, where spirituality is felt in the very air, and where even the simplest walk around its base can change lives. Don't miss this deep dive into the mysteries of Arunachala in our upcoming chapter. Thank you for listening till the end. Please subscribe, turn on the notifications, like, comment, and share with your friends. This will help more listeners to discover our channel and content.